And so we arrive, if one can call it arriving, at the end of this little journey together. But endings, as you now know, are never quite what they seem. Every ending is simply the soft fading of one form into another, the exhale before the next inhale. And in that spirit, let us consider one final question, perhaps the quietest and most intimate of them all. Who has been listening? Not the name on your passport, not the personality you perform for the world, not even the inner voice that comments, evaluates, agrees or disagrees. Those come and go like weather. But something in you has been steady, silent, spacious, alert. Something that received every word without effort. Something that did not need to understand, yet recognized the truth when it heard it. Something that is not separate from the very flow we have been speaking about. This clear, aware presence is what the Daoists were pointing to all along. It is not a thing you can grasp, not a belief you can adopt, not an achievement you can earn. It is simply the background of your experience, the same background that has been here since childhood, since before memory, since before the moment you learned to call yourself I. You may have noticed it in moments of quiet, perhaps while watching rain trace its way down a window, or during a pause in conversation, when everything suddenly feels simple and enough, or in those rare instants when beauty moves through you with no commentary, no grasping, no demand, only wonder. That clarity is not something you cultivate. It is something you uncover by letting everything else fall away. The Daoists were never trying to improve the self. They were trying to reveal what remains when the self relaxes. You do not become aligned with the Tao. You realize you were never separate from it. All your striving, all your searching, all your attempts to be a better version of yourself. These are like waves attempting to reach the ocean. A beautiful effort, but unnecessary. You are already the ocean. The mask you wear will continue to shift. Roles will come and go. Successes will rise and fall. Relationships will begin and end. That's the play, the drama, the ever-changing surface of things. But beneath it, the actor remains untouched, luminous, free. And so, as this video closes, there is nothing you need to remember, nothing you need to hold on to. Just notice, right now, the simple fact of being aware. Notice how natural it is, how effortless. Notice that you didn't create it and you cannot lose it. This awareness is the Tao expressing itself as you. It always has been. It always will be. Whether you chase it or forget it, seek it or ignore it, it remains, quietly shining behind every moment of your life. And when you finally stop trying to capture it, you will discover that you are home. Not at the end of the journey, but at the beginning of everything. If all of this seems lofty or abstract, Tao, mutual arising, wu-wei, the dance of the mask and the actor, rest assured that its purpose is nothing other than to bring us back to the ordinary world. The Daoists were never concerned with escaping life. Their great secret was always that enlightenment is not a place you retreat to, but a way you move in the world you already inhabit. And for this, they offered a simple, exquisite metaphor: water. Water does not try to be water. It doesn't strain, or strive, or put on an act. And yet, without ambition, it nourishes everything. Without force, it shapes mountains. Without arrogance, it finds its way through every crack and crevice. Water is soft and therefore undefeatable. It yields and therefore prevails. This, they said, is the way to live. Not as a doctrine, not as a moral imperative, but as an experiment. What happens when you begin to move like water? Consider how water behaves. It takes the shape of whatever contains it. A glass, a riverbed, a cloud. It adapts instantly, without complaint, without resistance. Yet it never loses its nature. It remains fully, unmistakably water. Most people imagine that flexibility is weakness. But water's genius is precisely that it is strong because it is flexible. A rigid tree snaps in a storm. A bamboo bends and survives. Human beings, however, tend to live like rigid trees. We cling to our opinions, identities, expectations. We demand that the world fit the contours of our desires. And when life inevitably refuses, we become frustrated, bitter, or exhausted. To live like water does not mean abandoning responsibility or floating aimlessly. It means meeting the world as it is, not as we insist it must be. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine you are trying to solve a problem, and the more you try, the more stuck you become. Thoughts tighten, frustration builds, and effort becomes counterproductive. Then, perhaps by accident, you take a walk. You relax. You forget the problem for a moment. And suddenly the solution appears, unforced, like a reflection forming on a still pond. That is water. That is wu-wei in action. The mind becomes clear when it stops churning. Or consider interpersonal conflict. If you meet anger with anger, tension escalates. But sometimes a gentle response, a soft word, a moment of listening, disarms the situation entirely. Soft overcomes hard, not by defeating it, but by dissolving its momentum. That is water. Or consider creativity. When you stop trying to be brilliant, inspiration arrives. When you stop forcing originality, something fresh and effortless emerges. The best ideas come not from strain but from spaciousness. And this is why the Daoists loved water. It demonstrates that yielding is not the opposite of strength. It is a different kind of strength altogether. A strength that does not advertise itself. Now, living like water does not mean that you become passive or apathetic. Water can be extraordinarily active. It flows, rushes, carves, crashes. But it never loses its coherence. It never acts from tension. Its movements are always in harmony with the terrain. In the same way, the more you drop the internal struggle, trying to impress, prove, force, control, the more naturally effective you become. Life begins to feel less like a battlefield and more like a tide you can learn to read. And when you live this way, something remarkable happens. Ordinary moments become luminous. Washing dishes becomes a small ceremony. Walking down the street becomes a conversation with the world. Listening to a friend becomes an act of presence. Even difficulties become waves you learn to surf, rather than storms you must survive. The Tao is not hidden in mountaintops or monasteries. It is right here, in the steam rising from a cup of tea, in the rhythm of your breath, in the way the afternoon light spills over the floor. To live the Tao is to stop searching for life and start participating in it. To stop insisting on a script and begin improvising. To become soft enough to adapt and strong enough to endure. It is to understand that the universe is not something happening to you. It is something happening through you. And once you sense that, you begin to live with the quiet confidence of water. Gentle, clear, and unstoppable. By now, if you've followed us through the dance of opposites, through the rhythm of arising and dissolving, through the quiet pulse of the Tao and the ease of wu-wei, you may begin to feel a kind of inner loosening. A softening of the sense that life is something you must grip tightly or control relentlessly. But for most people, there remains one final, not one last illusion that holds everything together. It is the belief that you are who you think you are. Now, this sounds innocent enough. After all, who else could you be? You have a name, a history, likes and dislikes, opinions and memories. And you carry these things around like a wallet full of identification cards. When someone asks, "Who are you?" you present these cards proudly. This is me. But there's a small problem. Every single one of those cards was handed to you. Your name was chosen for you. Your language was taught to you. Your beliefs were absorbed long before you had the ability to question them. Your personality, your precious personality, is mostly a collection of reinforced habits, copied behaviors, and accidental tendencies. The you defend so vigorously is, in many ways, a social construction, a mask woven from other people's expectations, cultural patterns, and your own attempts to be acceptable, lovable, or safe. But here is the marvelous twist. The mask is not the issue. Masks are useful. You cannot live in society without some form of mask. Even the most authentic person you've ever met is performing a role, however unconsciously. The real issue is when you forget that it is a mask. When an actor becomes so lost in the character that he believes he is truly Hamlet or King Lear, the play becomes a tragedy not by Shakespeare's design but by psychological confusion. In the same way, most of us live hypnotized by our own performance. We mistake the character for the actor, the costume for the being wearing it. Allow me to illustrate. Imagine you are watching waves on the ocean. You wouldn't say one wave is more wavish than another, or that a wave should improve itself, or that a wave should stop being so emotional. You see each wave as a temporary expression of the sea, arising, curling, collapsing, and returning. But that's precisely what you are, a temporary expression of everything, a momentary crest of the universe, a pattern through which the cosmos is looking at itself. Your personality is not a fixed identity. It's a dance, a pattern, a swirl. Useful, yes, but never solid. If you examine it closely, you'll notice it changes depending on who you're with, the environment you're in, the roles you're expected to fulfill, the mood that moves through you, and even the time of day, which means the self is not an object. It's a process, a verb rather than a noun. But the mind wants nouns. It wants labels because labels feel safe. And so we cling to our masks, terrified that without them, we would vanish. Yet the opposite is true. When you stop clinging to the mask, you discover a remarkable freedom. The freedom to play your roles consciously, lightly, with a sense of humor. You become like an actor who knows he is acting, not in a way that cheapens the performance, but in a way that allows him to play the role with finesse. You may still be a parent, a professional, a lover, a friend. But now you're not trapped inside the role. You are playing it. And there is a vast difference between living inside a role and dancing with it. This is why the sages laugh. They laugh because the great cosmic joke is that the self you defend is not the self you are. Beneath the costume, beneath the name, beneath the story, there is something spacious, something luminous, something untouched by the rise and fall of circumstance. Call it awareness. Call it presence. Call it the Tao looking out through human eyes. It doesn't matter what label you use because it existed before all labels. And when you glimpse even a sliver of that, when you see that you are the actor behind the mask, not the mask itself, life becomes infinitely lighter. You gain the freedom to flow, to adapt, to play, to love, and even to suffer without being swallowed. For the mask may crack, but the actor remains untouched. Now, if everything we have said so far is true, if opposites arise together, if life and death form a single pulse, if the Tao is the ungraspable background of all things, then a very curious question appears. How should one live? Most people, hearing philosophies of harmony or balance, immediately imagine rules, procedures, disciplines, methods. But the Daoists play a completely different game. They point towards something that, at first glance, feels impossibly simple. A way of living that does not fight the current of life, but moves with it. They called it wu-wei, often translated as non-action, though that phrase is terribly misleading. Wu-wei does not mean laziness, passivity, or indifference. It means effortless action, action aligned with the natural grain of things, so that the world begins to move through you rather than against you. Think for a moment of how we usually approach life. We push, we strain, we clench our mental fists, we try to force ourselves to be better, faster, more successful, more spiritual. We try to bend situations and people to our will. And then we are surprised when everything becomes heavy, rigid, and resistant. But watch a great sailor. He does not shove the boat across the sea. He simply arranges his sail to meet the wind. Or watch a master of judo. He does not collide with his opponent's force. He redirects it, using the opponent's momentum to achieve victory without struggle. Or watch an artist truly absorbed in her craft. She is not trying hard to create. The brush seems to move by itself, as though guided by a deeper intelligence. This is wu-wei, the deep insight that the universe works perfectly well without your constant interference, and often works better when you stop pushing so hard. We misunderstand effort. We imagine that the harder we strain, the more real our accomplishments become. But strain is usually a sign that we are working against ourselves. It is a symptom of inner division, the part of you that wants something fighting the part of you that resists it. Wu-wei, on the other hand, arises when there is no internal conflict, when your action is the natural expression of your circumstances, like water flowing downhill or bamboo bending in the wind. This does not mean doing nothing. It means acting from clarity rather than from compulsion. acting from alignment rather than from panic, acting with the precision of someone who knows that life has its own tide, and that you do not need to hold up the ocean with your bare hands. In fact, the greatest things in life tend to happen when you stop insisting that they must. Love appears when you stop hunting for it. Creativity blooms when you stop commanding inspiration to arrive on schedule. Insight dawns when the mind stops demanding answers. And in this sense, wu-wei is not a technique you apply, but a posture you relax into. It is what remains when you stop pushing the world and let the world reveal how it wants to move. To live in wu-wei is to trust the Tao not as a belief but as a lived experiment. It is to let each moment show you its own intelligence. It is to discover that the universe, far from being an adversary, is a partner in the dance. And when you begin moving with it, rather than against it, you find that life becomes strangely fluid. Obstacles soften, timing improves, and what once felt like effort now feels like participation. That is the art of effortless action. Now, if everything we have said so far is true, if opposites arise together, if life and death form a single pulse, if the Tao is the ungraspable background of all things, then a very curious question appears. How should one live? Most people, hearing philosophies of harmony or balance, immediately imagine rules, procedures, disciplines, methods. But the Daoists play a completely different game. They point towards something that, at first glance, feels impossibly simple. A way of living that does not fight the current of life, but moves with it. They called it wu-wei, often translated as non-action, though that phrase is terribly misleading. Wu-wei does not mean laziness, passivity, or indifference. It means effortless action, action aligned with the natural grain of things, so that the world begins to move through you rather than against you. Think for a moment of how we usually approach life. We push, we strain, we clench our mental fists, we try to force ourselves to be better, faster, more successful, more spiritual. We try to bend situations and people to our will, and then we are surprised when everything becomes heavy, rigid, and resistant. But watch a great sailor. He does not shove the boat across the sea. He simply arranges his sail to meet the wind. Or watch a master of judo. He does not collide with his opponent's force. He redirects it, using the opponent's momentum to achieve victory without struggle. Or watch an artist truly absorbed in her craft. She is not trying hard to create. The brush seems to move by itself, as though guided by a deeper intelligence. This is wu-wei. The deep insight that the universe works perfectly well without your constant interference, and often works better when you stop pushing so hard. We misunderstand effort. We imagine that the harder we strain, the more real our accomplishments become. But strain is usually a sign that we are working against ourselves. It is a symptom of inner division, the part of you that wants something fighting the part of you that resists it. Wu-wei, on the other hand, arises when there is no internal conflict, when your action is the natural expression of your circumstances, like water flowing downhill or bamboo bending in the wind. This does not mean doing nothing. It means acting from clarity rather than from compulsion. Acting from alignment rather than from panic. Acting with the precision of someone who knows that life has its own tide, and that you do not need to hold up the ocean with your bare hands. In fact, the greatest things in life tend to happen when you stop insisting that they must. Love appears when you stop hunting for it. Creativity blooms when you stop commanding inspiration to arrive on schedule. Insight dawns when the mind stops demanding answers. And in this sense, wu-wei is not a technique you apply, but a posture you relax into. It is what remains when you stop pushing the world and let the world reveal how it wants to move. To live in wu-wei is to trust the Tao not as a belief but as a lived experiment. It is to let each moment show you its own intelligence. It is to discover that the universe, far from being an adversary, is a partner in the dance. And when you begin moving with it, rather than against it, you find that life becomes strangely fluid. Obstacles soften, timing improves, and what once felt like effort now feels like participation. That is the art of effortless action. If we are going to understand the Tao with any clarity, we must take a bold step into one of its most disorienting insights. An insight that, once grasped, unravels a tremendous amount of confusion about life. It is the principle called mutual arising. or, in the language of the Daoists, the truth that this and that come into being together. Lao Tzu begins the second chapter of his book with a sentence that might at first sound like poetic exaggeration, but it is in fact a precise observation of how consciousness works. When people see things as beautiful, ugliness is created. When people see things as good, bad is created. He is not saying that beauty causes ugliness in some moral sense, nor that goodness somehow leaks its opposite into the world. Rather, he is pointing out something far more subtle. The moment you draw a boundary, any boundary, you bring two sides into being simultaneously. You cannot have a front without a back. You cannot have a top without a bottom. You cannot know the meaning of self without other. And you cannot define life without the existence of death. These are not enemies. They are partners. They arise together like two ends of a single stick. To imagine you could have one without the other is like imagining a coin with only one side. Yet this is exactly what human beings keep trying to do. We want happiness without sadness, success without failure, pleasure without discomfort. We want the crest of the wave and only the crest, never the trough. But a wave is the crest and trough. Remove the trough and the crest collapses. Remove the downbeat in music, and the upbeat loses meaning. Remove silence, and sound can no longer be heard. Consider the relationship between bees and flowers. On the surface, they look like entirely separate creatures. One buzzing in the air, the other rooted in the earth. And yet they are not two processes but one. The bee is the mobile part of the flower, and the flower is the fragrant part of the bee. They cannot exist without each other, and in fact, they are two expressions of a single system that only looks divided because we stand too close to see its wholeness. The same is true of you and your opposite, whatever or whoever you think that is. Your enemy defines you just as much as your friends do. The in-group needs the out-group. The righteous require the sinners. The respectable must imagine the disreputable. Otherwise, who would they be? Even up and down depend on where you're pointing your head. Stand on your hands and the whole world flips. Up becomes down and down becomes up. These are relative distinctions, not absolute truths written into the fabric of the cosmos. The Daoists saw this clearly. They understood that the world is a dance of opposites, not a war between them. Yin and Yang are shown as two swirling shapes, not because they endlessly fight, but because they endlessly give birth to each other. The white curve carries a seed of black, and the black carries a seed of white, because each contains the potential of its partner. Push any quality to an extreme, joy, sorrow, order, chaos, and it inevitably flips into its counterpart. And here lies the real trouble. The moment we imagine one side of the polarity is good and the other bad, we begin a futile struggle to maintain one and eliminate the other. But trying to keep only the pleasant half of experience is precisely what generates fear, tension, and neurosis. Imagine trying to arrange everything in your room so it is only front and never back, or trying to make a melody with only high notes, or breathing only in and never out. This is why people suffer. Not because life is cruel, but because they misunderstand how it works. They want stability in a universe that is dynamic. They want permanence in a world made of waves. They want life without death, which is like wanting movement without change. Once you see that opposites arise together, something remarkable happens. The world stops being a battlefield and becomes a kind of playful oscillation. A dance, not a duel. You begin to see the wisdom in both sides of every polarity. You may still prefer one side, after all, we are human, but you no longer fear the other. And when fear dissolves, a tremendous freedom appears. The freedom to ride the wave instead of fighting it, to see the wholeness behind the halves, and to discover that what you called opposites were simply two ways of touching the same mystery. If we are to move even a step further on this little adventure together, we must approach a peculiar idea, one that sits at the heart of ancient Chinese philosophy, and yet continues to elude grasp in every age. It is called the Tao, and unfortunately for us, the first thing the sages tell us about it is that it cannot be spoken. The Tao that can be described, Lao Tzu wrote, is not the eternal Tao. Now, this seems like a terribly inconvenient way to begin any explanation. It's a bit like someone inviting you to dinner and then announcing that food cannot be eaten. And yet, notice what happens when we try to describe anything too closely tied to our own nature. You cannot look directly at your own eyes without a mirror. You cannot bite your own teeth. A finger cannot touch its own tip. And the one who is trying to understand consciousness is consciousness. You are trying to catch your own shadow. The Tao is very much like that. It is not an object among other objects. It is the background, the context, the stage on which the play unfolds. It is the canvas behind the painting, the silence that allows sound to be heard, the open space in which all forms arise and fall away. Most of us are accustomed to thinking in terms of things, this book, that table, this thought, that emotion. But the Tao is not a thing at all. It is the suchness of things, the way they come into being and pass out again, seamlessly and without effort. It is the rhythm that animates the world, though we usually notice only the dancers and not the dance. And so, when we speak of the Tao, there is always a great risk that we will mistake the pointing finger for the moon. But still, we try, because something in us recognizes that the universe is not random chaos, nor a machine grinding towards some predetermined purpose. Rather, it moves with an ease and fluidity, a kind of unforced artistry, like water finding its way downhill. Consider your breath. You can hold it for a moment, you can speed it up or slow it down. But fundamentally, breathing breathes itself. It does not ask your permission. It does not consult your plans. It simply happens. In exactly this way, thoughts think themselves, feelings feel themselves, and the body ages without ever requesting your opinion. Existence unfolds spontaneously. The Tao is the name ancient sages gave to this spontaneous unfolding, the intelligence woven into the fabric of nature. But here's the twist. You are not outside of this unfolding, looking at it as an observer. You are woven from the same fabric. You are a strand in the same tapestry. The mind creates the illusion of standing apart, of being a lonely little ego sealed in a bag of skin. But look closely and you will see that the boundaries are quite porous. You cannot exist without the air around you. You cannot perceive without light. You cannot be you without the world arising to meet you. Just as a wave cannot be separated from the ocean, you are not truly separate from the field of existence that sustains you. You appear for a moment, cresting, shimmering, then fall back into the deep. And the ocean never considered you apart from itself. This is why the Tao cannot be defined. Because to define something is to place it opposite something else, to say, I am here and that is there. But the Tao is the totality. It is the here and the there, the figure and the ground, the seeker and the sought. Trying to define it is like trying to draw a boundary around everything. Where would you even begin? Any line you draw would itself be part of the whole. So instead of giving us definitions, the ancient sages gave us images. The valley, the river, the empty bowl, the wheel with its hub of nothingness. And all of them point to the same realization, that the foundation of life is not a solid, graspable substance, but an open, dynamic mystery. A mystery so intimate that it is living through your eyes right now. And once you sense that, even faintly, you begin to loosen your grip on the frantic attempt to control life. You begin to relax into the deeper order moving beneath all appearances. You begin, quite naturally, to fall back into rhythm with the Tao that has been carrying you all along. Let us begin, if you will, with a small and rather curious observation. Most of us enter this world already halfway convinced that we know who we are. Not because we've looked deeply or listened carefully, or inquired with any seriousness into the nature of our own existence, but because we've been told firmly, repeatedly, and with great confidence, what sort of creature we are supposed to be. Before you could walk, someone handed you a name. Before you could speak, someone handed you a nationality. Before you could understand a single thing about the cosmos, someone handed you a religion, a political label, or at the very least, a polite suggestion about the kind of person you ought to grow into. And because human beings are extraordinarily impressionable, you accepted all of this as naturally as you accepted gravity. And so, for most of our lives, we wander about wearing these labels, these costumes, these little badges of identity. We play the part of the responsible adult, the good citizen, the student, the professional, the parent, the believer, the skeptic. All of which might be perfectly fine except for one small complication. None of them are you. They are roles, yes, useful ones, sometimes even noble ones. But roles remain roles. Just as the actor disappears the moment the curtain falls, the self you take so seriously is merely a collection of habits and social agreements. Agreements so ancient and so unquestioned that we've forgotten they were invented. Think for a moment of something as simple as time. We wake up by the clock, eat by the clock, rush and rest by the clock, and imagine the clock is telling us something about the universe. But the clock is not cosmic. It's a device, an elegant, arbitrary contraption that slices the river of experience into little artificial pieces so we can coordinate lunch appointments. Or consider language. We use words as if they were reflections of reality. Yet words are shadows, not the things themselves. And so we argue fiercely about shadows, cling desperately to shadows, even define ourselves by shadows, and then wonder why we feel anxious, constrained, or strangely hollow. It is as though humanity has mistaken the map for the landscape, the menu for the meal, the mask for the face. And somewhere beneath all this, beneath the names, the occupations, the expectations, there is a quiet, persistent question that refuses to be silenced. Who am I, really? This question is not an academic one. It is the doorway through which all genuine transformation begins. It is the itch that no amount of success, praise, or self-improvement will ever fully soothe. Because deep down, you sense that the person you've been performing is only a performance. And so, in this journey we're about to take together, we will simply pull gently on the loose threads of this costume you call me. Not to destroy it, but to see what lies underneath. Not to reject society, but to become transparent to it. To look past the labels, past the roles, past the machinery of identity, and glimpse, even briefly, the living mystery that has been here long before any of your stories began.